when generative AI first became a thing and like when ChatGPT came out, someone made a comparison to like one question you ask ChatGPT, like that would be the equivalent of charging like 10 iPhones or something like that. People don't realize the amount of energy that's being consumed just for these like mundane requests to an AI system. And it used to be that like people said that, what was really limiting AI from developing quickly, like in the early 2000s, was compute. So we didn't have computer systems fast enough to be able to do this stuff. Now the limiting factor with like AI proliferation is energy and the ability to actually power these facilities at large scale.
Hey, welcome, Matt. Welcome back. You're the first ever full-length episode of Talking Ass. It feels like a lifetime ago, eh?
Yeah. Yeah, it was I think an evening back in what, like February, March? When was it?
Yeah, must have been February, yeah. But you really proved to us in that episode, so go back and listen to episode 2 of season 1, which is the ethics and future of AI or whatever it was called. You really proved that you know what you're talking about because you mentioned this little Chinese company called DeepSeek. And when we were recording, that was like, that's a tidbit of information. And then, like the day after we released the episode, the whole AI world seemed to collapse because DeepSeek seemed to throw a massive wrench in the wheels. Has everything recovered now?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody kind of went into this fervor about what was going to happen in the AI community, given that the Chinese came out with such a good model. And I think what was really interesting about DeepSeek was that they used very limited compute to train it. And so that everybody was saying, that the traditional approach that all these American tech companies have been taking was basically they were overspending, is what everybody was saying. They didn't need the Chinese were able to do much more with less. But I think what's interesting, with AI models in general is every AI model that comes out, a day later is going to be better than the one that came out the day before. So they just
Yeah.
keep getting better and better and better.
But do you think the Chinese could have played a massive, like, this is all a big hoodwink? Like they said, oh, we spent a fraction of the money the Western companies are spending and we still produce something that's almost as good, if not better. Do you think that was all nonsense? Because there are reports that they do smuggle the chips that they aren't allowed to buy. Like Western technology is being smuggled there. So do you think they just said that this was cheap and actually it was just as expensive?
Yeah, I mean, I think I sent you a blog post or a news article recently about some researchers going over from China to Malaysia, I think it was. They flew with hard drives full of data in their
Mm.
luggage so that they had access to these more advanced infrastructure, more faster accelerated computing. Um, I think with the Chinese were maybe not as forthcoming. I shouldn't say the Chinese. I mean, it's DeepSeek, but a lot of it is, at least invested in by the state.
I think it's fair to say that it's very difficult to be a relevant, large private company in China. I think everything is to some extent run by the party over there.
Yeah, but I think what DeepSeek published in its paper that got everybody going, pretty insane about what they were able to do with limited compute was they basically, so when you're training an AI model, you might have to have what they call multiple training runs, meaning you'll start to train the model and you hit some type of benchmark and it's not achieving what you needed to achieve in terms of a quality perspective. So they start over again. And so a lot of these, you might have 10, 20 training runs that get interrupted and you have to restart them. What DeepSeek published in their paper was basically the final training run. So it could be that, the cost to actually train that model was significantly more than what they published, but it's hard to say.
Yeah. So just to explain this to all of us, the bits, the components that a certain Western company makes, right? They're not allowed to buy them, but they're smuggling some of them. But what else? What other option do they have? Like, let's say the Chinese aren't doing anything weird with suitcases and hard drives and all that. What do they have in terms of computing power components compared to what we have here.
Yeah, so because of US export regulations, NVIDIA had to basically create a slower version of one of its most advanced AI chips. And basically what they did was is they limited the networking throughput. So you couldn't basically train something as fast and as quickly. So same chips, but different amount of networking. And I think what you're seeing now, and this is like at the heart of the whole debate, the Chinese have a lot of amazing companies in China. So you think of a company like Huawei, right? They're they're also making their own AI chips, but the debate is basically between like, do we want to limit the amount of chips that they can import from the United States, like American technology? Should we protect that because it's critical national infrastructure, and we want to make sure that we being Americans achieve super intelligence before the Chinese? But the other school of thought on that is that if the Chinese are going to be building these models, like you might as well let them use the American infrastructure, the American technology, and then that becomes the kind of um, the global standard for AI computing. So, if they're going to build a model, let it use the American technology. It'll increase the sales of that product. Ultimately, should result in better outcomes for everybody when you have the diffusion of this technology. So, I think those are the two schools of thoughts. It's like, do we protect it or do we just let it go crazy? And then that way, the world, when they're training these things and running inference on AI models, they they basically are building it on American technology, and that becomes the backbone of the AI industry, basically. But I mean, the Chinese, they because of the export controls, they had to find creative ways to be able to do the same thing. I mean, right now there's like if you just think of this like abstracted away from the tech companies and profit, governments are basically trying to achieve what we call super intelligence or artificial general intelligence before each other. And so the American government, like I don't know if this is how they actually think about it, but like the export controls would basically say, we're going to limit the amount of compute that we send to China so that as a country, we can achieve that super intelligence before they do. And the Americans also, there is diffusion of this technology all around the rest of the world. So, there were restrictions from Biden on Europe, but those have been removed. You see a lot of things in the press about Trump going to Riyadh and making a big deal with the Saudis. You see a lot. Trump was in the UAE as well. So the Americans are only really limiting the export of the technology to specific countries. And so the Western world, if you will, Western in quotes, or as the British say, inverted commas, which I always think is weird.
In inverted commas, the Western world and its allies are allowed to have all the chips. So you sent me quite an alarmist article that made a lot of sense, but in another way didn't, that directly compared the chips to enriched uranium, basically, and that the race to superintelligence is like the race to the nuclear weapon. And because of that, the diffusion of certain materials has to be with, in the countries that we select, right? Western allies, and we don't want the others to have them. But there are a couple of flaws with that argument. First of all, I mean, this isn't uranium, right? This is technically AI and development of AI. Anyone with a laptop or a phone is part of it, right? Because it's not like during the Cold War, everyone had a bit of uranium ore in their pockets and they could jump on a plane and take it to another country. Whereas now, kind of, because it's so knowledge based as well, like on top of all these processors or whatever they're called, components that you can restrict, maybe to a certain extent. You can't restrict like the knowledge and the use of AI, which is constantly training these models, right? Everyone has the ore in their pocket. See what I mean?
Yeah, but so the things that people have in their pocket are a bit different than maybe what a government would use. So like what you and I use as consumers, or even what enterprises use, they typically have these guardrails on them. So there's this big thing in AI called alignment, which is basically making sure that AI is aligned to benefiting humans and to the greater good of humans. And alignment is usually a conversation that that people start talking about when you start talking about like artificial general intelligence or the singularity, which is basically where machines, surpass the intelligence of humans. But the models that you have access to as a consumer all have all these guardrails on them. Like you can look at the DeepSeek model, for example. If you asked it questions about China, it would always give favorable responses, or it would say, I can't talk about that, right? But what governments might eventually develop are these models, right, that don't have these guardrails, where, the AI can kind of go off the rails. Like, you remember I sent you that it was Werner Herzog reading AI developed literature.
Yeah.
That was a version like a predecessor to ChatGPT's or GPT 3.5. I forget. I think it was called the Da Vinci model. And basically, there were no guardrails on that model, and they asked it to write things and output things that typically would never be output. So I think that what governments might have access to will be vastly different to what we have access to as consumers. Now the open source models, I think some of them, in their instruction tuning, well, the open source models maybe you have a little more control over in terms of guardrails. Like you can kind of set your own guardrails. But what you're using in consumer apps, like they're given instructions to say what they can and can't do.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I think what you were saying about, the article I sent you was, I think it was a paper by the former CEO of Google, Eric Schmidt, and it was called Superintelligent Strategy. And it was basically that if any country tries to like unilaterally dominate a super intelligent form of AI, the adversaries of that country and its allies are not really going to stand for that lasting imbalance. And they'll see it as like an existential threat to their existence. And that's why he's comparing it to the Manhattan Project. It's like
Yeah.
basically the race to achieve, like in the Second World War, it was the race to achieve an atomic weapon. Now it's a race to achieve a super intelligent AI system. And what he argues is that like when you achieve super intelligence, when an AI system achieves super intelligence, you're going to see this really steep curve. And basically, the AI can, you know, once it's super intelligent, it can keep improving itself. And if one country even achieves that super intelligence 6 months ahead of another country, the other country will basically never be able to catch up. And
Okay. I see. Yes. And that means they would just with conventional bombs, they would bomb the data centers.
yeah, I mean, you think of like what they can do. So I think he talks about in the paper this something called, you remember mutually assured destruction
Yeah.
from the Cold War.
That's what us soft scientists were studying at university. A lot of MAD, MAD,
Yeah, MAD. Yeah.
mutually assured destruction. Yeah.
Well, now I think it's MAME. I think is the acronym.
Yeah.
Mutually assured AI malfunction is what is what
Yeah.
he called what he called it in that paper. But
Okay.
basically, it's like that if these countries are significantly far ahead and they think that there's a risk that they will achieve super intelligence before them, it could lead to this escalation and conflict, which, probably starts with something less severe than bombing. It's probably like cyber attacks or some type of kinetic energy strike on AI infrastructure. But that could escalate, and what Eric Schmidt says is, if you listen, I think he did a TED talk recently. It's a good one, by the way. You should listen to it.
We'll put the links to both this article that you're talking about, Eric Schmitz, and if I find a TED talk, I'll put the links in the show notes because I think these are worth reading. His arguments. It's interesting, a little bit alarming, but interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and you don't have to be technical to read these things. They're good. But I think
No.
where Schmidt says it'll go is like it starts with cyber attacks, maybe like some type of kinetic energy attack, and then ultimately it could escalate into, as you said, like full out, bombing of AI infrastructure facilities. So think of like that giant Stargate project that's being developed in the United States, that basically the only way to stop the nation from achieving the super intelligence is to destroy the infrastructure. And so that's like this is probably on one of the extremes, but if you actually believe that this super intelligence will be able to kind of self-propagate and continue learning once you achieve it, then maybe it's not far off that, the race to get there is absolutely critical. And that's why, the United States wants to limit or control the export and supply of chips.
Yes. Speaking of data centers and the risks, TikTok is building one in like rural Finland, somewhere
Yeah.
in the east, like relatively near Russia and whatever. And I was thinking in America, when we talk about maybe someone potentially harming data centers in the future, or even now, it could be a pretty useful thing to do to your adversary. In America, like security guards have guns, and I'm sure they would put like 17 layers of fences around these things, and you somehow you think that it would require a major movie style operation to do something. But in rural Finland, first of all, guards aren't allowed to have guns. And secondly, in rural Finland, like whatever security they have, within a month they'll be complacent and they'll just start. Like in Finland, you can just walk onto a thing like this and look like you belong and walk your dog and you'll be in it. Like that, it's.
I mean, I think the data centers that most of these companies build, like these big tech companies, they might not necessarily have like missile defenses around it, but the physical security, even in Finland, is quite stringent. So like I remember from my time at Google, they really limited the number of people that could actually access the data centers. You had to go through like you had to do an iris scan, you had to do all types of things to actually get into the facility.
Yeah. So you're saying we need Danny Ocean and his pals to get
Yeah, maybe
to have
drill
any chance?
like tunnel
Yeah.
under it, but that's
Yeah.
that's why, like, the most likely thing, it wouldn't be like an armed raid on the data center itself. It would be like the equivalent of like a B, what is it, a stealth bomber dropping a payload on it from 7 miles in the sky.
It's called a B2, Matt, and we're not going to make this about a war, about the war, but right now everyone just Google an image of a B2 stealth bomber. It is like it is one of the coolest looking machines ever made.
Yeah.
That's all. Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like something from the future. Yeah. By the way, all these companies love building data centers in the Nordic regions because
Because it's cold. Is that right?
well, it's cold. There's access to a ton of renewable energy, so you tend to have like a lot of wind and solar power, and there's a lot of land for relatively cheap, like in certain parts of those nations. And so you'll see like a lot of companies building data centers in Finland and Sweden. I think Norway hasn't been as prevalent, but Finland and Sweden, I think, are very popular destinations for data centers.
That's a great segue because this time I've actually used Elon's Grok AI for some help. And I fed it the previous episode. It said we want to go deeper, that was a bit of an introduction. And one of the questions it said that's a good question to ask if you want to deeper dive into AI is environmental impact. So you're saying they're putting them in the Nordic countries, stable political systems, renewable energy, and a cold climate. I mean, the carbon footprint of a data center and AI in general must be massive. So what's the trade-off here? What are we getting for all that?
Yeah, so well, yeah, okay, so your first question, like, what's the environmental impact of AI? So
Mhm.
these data centers, I mean, if you just Google, like, for those of you listening, just Google an image of Stargate. Maybe Danny, you should look at it as well. Um,
Yeah, I got it.
so
Yeah.
the Stargate facility is 900 acres.
Oh, I see. I have a Stargate TV show from 1997, and it's got a very attractive looking bunch of people going through a literal Stargate. So that's not what we're looking at then.
Yeah, that's probably cooler, but no, the Stargate facility is like an 875 acre site in West Texas.
I see
Um,
it. Okay. That's
yeah,
insane looking.
and it's bigger than Central Park in Manhattan, just to put it in perspective. And so like the size and scale of this facility is absolutely enormous. I think there was something on, they did a documentary or a news episode on, I can't remember which news agency had put something out, but they were basically talking to the founder of the company that's building it, and they were walking around the site and talking about all that. But have a look. It's really interesting just to see like the size and scale of what's required to operate a business like OpenAI, because Stargate is for OpenAI, and to be able to actually provide compute for the amount of users that they have, they need these. massive plots of land. And I think there's probably like from an environmental side of things, there's a few things that go into it. So one is that everybody talks about is energy consumption. Now they talk about AI data centers. Instead of talking about how many chips you have in it, they talk about how many gigawatts the data center will be, and that tells you the amount of compute you can get out of it. So the more advanced chips do actually take more energy to run, but you get more out of it for that amount of energy. But so I think like there's going to be this like rapid rise in energy consumption just from these data centers. I remember like when generative AI first became a thing, and these systems, by the way, have become more, they've optimized these systems so they're more efficient. As I said, with each new generation of infrastructure, you get more inference or more output of the AI model for a similar amount of infrastructure. But when generative AI first became a thing, and like when ChatGPT came out, someone made a comparison to like one question you ask ChatGPT, like, you know, what should I make my dog for her birthday? That would be the equivalent of charging like 10 iPhones or something like that. Maybe it was 50 iPhones. I don't remember the exact number, but people don't realize the amount of energy that's being consumed just for these like mundane requests to an AI system.
That's mad. Now that makes me feel like it's so much guiltier. I already felt like we're using it too much now. Once you start playing with these things, you start asking it every question. So a simple question, it's still maybe environmentally more friendly to just Google it. Or
Probably, yeah, probably, because again, the amount of compute required, like especially as like AI reasoning models become more pervasive, they take a
hmm.
lot more compute at the time of inference.
But now Google also in every search they add an AI overview. So they're using something that
Yeah,
is maybe similar. So it's why haven't I haven't heard our government warn citizens about this because that sounds to me like an insane exponential need for new energy. That means we need to start building nuclear sites under all of these data centers, right? Reactors will is the only way to power these things.
yeah, I had a conversation with some people here in the UK recently about this. So what we were talking about was, a company like Rolls-Royce should basically modularize their nuclear capability, their nuclear power capability. And then you have like these module power stations that you can move around to actually power these AI data centers. And I think you did hear too recently about like an American company, I think it was Google actually making a deal for um, for nuclear power in the United States. But yeah, like back to it, I think like an AI text generation query will probably be like 4 to 5 times more energy than like your standard Google search or any web-based search. Like those search engines still use language models, but it doesn't have to generate as much text typically, and it's not going through the same thinking process as like an AI model. And then like training one of these models probably uses as much electricity as like the lifetime emissions of like multiple vehicles. So people don't think about that, but and by the way, like AI agents are not yet pervasive, and you will see like a pervasive AI agent. So an AI agent is basically, an AI model that has agency, that you give agency to go out, can understand context, and can do things autonomously for you. So you're giving that AI model agency to act on your behalf. And the prediction is that AI agents are going to become pervasive like in the next few years. You're already starting to see examples of that. But as AI agents become more pervasive, like the amount of electricity required is going to substantially increase. So that you're probably looking at like a 15% year over year growth rate or like annual growth rate on the amount of electricity consumed by data centers, which could even go up with you know agentic AI becoming pervasive. So that's one is like just the sheer amount of energy consumption.
So how much would, let's say we have an AI agent, I'm assuming that will require charging if it lives on our phone on an app or if it lives on our computer, it requires charging that device much more often. How much more often would we be talking like?
Well, I think most AI workloads today are run out of data centers. So there are language models and things that run on your mobile phone and can run on smaller devices. But For the most part, these agentic capabilities will likely be cloud-based out of it, or run out of some data center. So it typically won't have like a big impact on your peripheral or like the device that you use to actually access that model. And that's part of the problem, by the way, is people don't see the impact of it because it's not like, you don't see what's the amount of compute required, the amount of energy you consume when you actually use these things. Um, if your phone died every 4 hours because you had an agent running on your phone, like it might be a little bit more noticeable, right?
Yeah. And I can see in every rendering of this Stargate you're talking about, in every rendered image of it, there is some kind of power station attached to it. I know that you said in Nordic countries they can make that renewable energy, and I mean, hydroelectric power will run a smaller one maybe forever, but this sounds like we will need more and more data centers, and at the end of the day, that sounds like a world in which there is some kind of mini nuclear reactor all over the place, right? Which then massively increases maybe the potential for accidents and leaks and all that, but also increases nuclear waste. And I guess basically it sounds like without us noticing, because each one will be just built somewhere and it'll be a local news story. But then I guess if we, in 20, 30 years, we pull out a map of where there are nuclear reactors, suddenly the world will be dotted with these, and they're everywhere.
Yeah, well, and this is the same like challenge with AI diffusion is like with AI diffusion, you need energy diffusion. And so there are some countries that have more access to energy. And of course, nuclear energy is highly regulated, right? So
It's currently being regulated by those B-2 Spirit bombers we talked
yeah,
about.
it's being regulated both via policy and some type of, yeah, I don't want to get into the that topic, but what did he call that? A spectacular I can't remember what
It
Trump
was
said,
a
but
I mean, it was a spectacular success.
yeah,
Obliteration, yeah,
yeah.
whatever.
So, but it's not easy, right? And that's why I was saying, companies need to start thinking about like modularizing a nuclear facility. So like, what if you could, build a nuclear facility that's the size of my house, or even put it in like shipping containers? But again, that's still going to be controlled, both in terms of physical controls and actual policy controls. So I don't know that that like is a short-term solution, but there's going to be massive drain on the power grid from this. And it used to be that like people said that what was really limiting AI from developing quickly, like in the early 2000s, like from like say 2010 on was compute, or like from the year 2000 on, like say compute was the limiting factor. So we didn't have computer systems fast enough to be able to do this stuff. Now the limiting factor with like AI proliferation is energy and the ability to actually power these facilities at large scale. And so that's the first one is energy consumption. The second one, Danny, on like environmental impact is water usage. And a lot of people don't think about this because a lot of people probably aren't aware of like what actually is required to run an AI system. But all of these chips now are water cooled. Not all of them. There are versions of them that are air cooled so that you can, run them in different locations if you don't have access to water. But the fastest systems, they generate so much heat that they all require water cooling. And so there's going to be huge strains on local water supplies for some of this. Like if you think about that.
Yeah. But it can that water, if it's just a coolant, it can be recycled, can it?
Well, I think in some cases it is a coolant. In some cases it's not. I think th I think in Stargate, I think they actually are using like some type of synthetic coolant and not water. But a lot of these data centers are still running on water.
Yeah, but I'm saying once let's say you somehow can cool the system down without much evaporation of the water, then regardless of whether it's coolant or actual H2O, then once it has cooled down the system, it should run back underground into some kind of reservoir so that we can recycle the same water. Surely that is an option, right?
Yeah, I don't know enough about the like actual physics of that. I'm not a scientist, so I couldn't tell you. But I think that is something that people need to think about. And then
Yeah.
Probably the third thing is like greenhouse gas emissions. So we're talking about nuclear energy, but almost all of these data centers today are powered by fossil fuels. And I would guess if we Googled them that there's been a significant increase in the amount of greenhouse gas emissions from these major tech companies since like the onset of ChatGPT. So these AI workloads are going to generate like a lot of emissions because they're primarily powered by fossil fuels.
Yeah. But as we said, we're guessing that that will move towards nuclear, and hopefully we invent some kind of fusion or some kind of way to harness the sun, and maybe we won't need that. But
Yeah, yeah. But Danny, when we're talking about environmental impact, we should talk about too, like those are the negatives. Like as a person that works in the AI industry, I also have to talk about, that AI could do good things for the environment. So like think about how we traditionally approached environmental problems. Like AI can probably help us with that, right? So AI systems can analyze like climate data. They can do simulation and like modeling. They can probably help with like optimization problems. So how do we optimize energy? They can maybe help with like improving renewable energy systems. They can also track things like methane emissions or I don't know what's like deforestation, and then maybe they can also help with like forecasting demand. So you can like reduce. I see listeners don't see that Danny and I are on video. Danny is he's so skeptical of what I just said, but
this is such a cool propaganda statement, bro. Like, oh yeah, it can tell you in exact calculations how it is ruining everything and the world is gonna end. But it can tell you really cleverly how it's all gonna happen, you know? But no, I can see your point. I mean, it's obviously gonna be massively helpful because it can do calculations at like the speed of light if you compare
yeah,
it to how quickly you and I calculate, you know?
yeah. I'll give you an example. Like Google was using when I was working there reinforcement learning to optimize the energy usage in their data centers. So using AI to actually try to optimize and to make more efficient, the use of AI. But yeah, at the end of the day, like energy consumption is going to increase significantly as we see more like pervasive AI
Yeah.
agents, and that's a challenge that I think you're right. Like right now, the only solution to is nuclear energy.
Yeah. And right now, it's an even better analogy to what you said is like there's a bunch of like soot-faced minimum wage employees shoving coal into a data center just so the data center can tell them how we shouldn't be using coal. You know?
Yeah, yeah. It's funny you make the coal analogy because like everybody's saying that AI is kind of like this next industrial revolution, and
Mm.
before you would put coal in and like steam would come out, or you'd put water in and steam would come out, and now you put power in and AI comes out.
AI and Steam,
Yeah,
because they need to be cooled down, and then I'm assuming that results in steam as well.
yeah,
So
some kind of evaporation.
maybe we can use the heat generated by the data center to produce steam that we can then go back to steam trains, and trains can run free on that steam that comes out of the data center. See?
Yeah, but like harnessing the output of it would be interesting. Um,
Yeah.
we should go talk to some people that are smarter than me about how
All
to do
right.
that.
The other thing that goes a little bit deeper than introductory stuff we talked about last time is the misinformation and deep fakes. So, especially deep fakes, let's focus on that. Misinformation, I don't actually have the patience for right now because we addressed that in a couple of episodes ago and it just makes me angry. But deep fakes are interesting because I'm not famous, but I'm a public enough person that there's enough data about things that I've said and my tone of voice and my intonation and everything and my accents and all that out there that certain AI models, if you ask them now who I am, they will return a relatively accurate answer. Not sometimes they hallucinate a thing or two because they need to fluff out the paragraphs, but they're okay at it. And then you can go further. You can ask them like, if Danny were to do an episode about this, how would it go roughly? And they'll return not a bad answer. And So for much more public people than me, this stuff is at a scary level. How do we know that it's, let's say, Donald Trump on TV right now?
Yeah, I think, well, to your example, by the way, it might be fun for like a future episode is to create an AI version of you. So like we could easily clone your voice because there's so much recorded audio of you. And there's a company I think called 11 Labs right now that if you see like these AI generated movies, all the voices in those movies are being generated by these like AI systems. And with just a few samples, they can very effectively clone your voice. So that's one of the sources that people could use for misinformation. Like so, yeah, the challenge, like there's tons of problems, right, with deep fakes. So one is like the spread of disinformation and like the erosion of trust that comes with that. So if you think about like I see something today, I trust that it's real, but like as these things become more pervasive, you're going to be like, wait a second, is that real? Like right now, it's usually being used for satire. So like if you see the ones of Trump, like they're usually funny, like he's in his underwear or in a diaper, like cooking in the kitchen or something like that. But it's meant to be like satire and funny. But
Yeah.
you can also use it for political manipulation, and there's also all these challenges that arise from like intellectual property. So again, there could be a user in some country that's like, oh, Danny has a pretty good podcast. I'm just going to remake Danny's podcast using AI. I'll have AI generate the scripts. I'll have AI generate the voices. And now there's a version of Danny like running in Bangladesh.
Plus, they can make an infinite amount of iterations. Like
Yeah.
this isn't working, no one's listening to this version of it, so they can just churn out
Yeah. So
various
I think,
deepfake versions.
yeah. So I think like deepfakes uh, for the last couple of years, AI models weren't that great. So especially with like video generation, like you could tell when there was manipulated content because there would be like weird, the lips wouldn't match to the speech, or someone would blink a lot, or maybe they might have like 9 fingers instead of 10, or they might have 14 fingers, or their hand might have some type of strange thing when it's generated. So like deep fakes were pretty easy to detect, but I think they're getting like way more convincing, and like even like manual detection is very difficult. So like you and I just looking at something or listening to something. There was an example of this on Spotify. I think someone like made a deep fake of was it a Drake song? I don't remember. But it was really difficult to tell that it wasn't like the actual artist and that it was a deep fake. And it landed on Spotify. So like the actual manual detection by you and me is becoming increasingly difficult, which means, that the problem of like spreading misinformation, like manipulating people, is going to be much more challenging. But I think even now, detection of these things by other AI systems, so like algorithmic detection, is a challenge. And the problem is that like when you develop a method to detect a deep fake, it creates like this cat and mouse thing where you create a technology to develop a deep fake, but that actually ends up improving the deep fake technologies themselves. and
Yeah.
and then you realize how it's detected and you adapt. So there's going to be like this really crazy dynamic between like the people that make these deep fakes and the people that detect them, and they're going to be playing like this cat and mouse game.
It's gonna be a revolving door, just like
Yeah,
banking and regulation. They're gonna go from one to the other and get,
yeah,
wherever.
but so like there are a lot of companies that are aligning on this. So I remember DeepMind made something called Synth ID, which was basically every AI generated image or video, there was like an invisible watermark on it, basically, that was detectable by these algorithms or these other systems. So you would know it's a deep fake. So I think like responsible companies are trying to find ways to approach that. But again, there's always going to be, individual actors or state actors that are trying to create things that don't have these watermarks because it's not to their advantage.
And then, I mean, before I became a quote unquote inverted commas creator of something, I never thought when it came to the threats of I never even put like artists and musicians and people like that. Never even crossed my mind. I was always thinking about how does it threaten our survival on this planet and how does it threaten the balance of power between the whatever countries that I like living in versus the ones that I maybe don't want to. But actually, this stuff is massively threatening artists. I mean, the movies, the songs are getting creepy good.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
if you add to that that they can fake a dead artist, like you can now have Kurt Cobain cover a Taylor Swift song, or Tupac being the lead singer of the Foo Fighters or whatever, and it'll do a pretty good job.
yeah. I mean, I think the question is whether the humans revolt. Like, do
Mm.
we like this gets to, do we like listening to the creation of content or the content created by other humans, or do we actually want to consume? Like, if we know it's not human generated content, are we gonna just completely turn off? And I don't know. I think right now people like to listen to it because they know it's AI generated, or they like to watch it because they know it's AI generated, and that's kind of novel. But I wonder if like at some point, you know, as a species, we're gonna kind of try to protect our own individual creativity and not want to consume the AI generated content. I mean, but Danny, you can think about like AI companions too. So there's lots of like companies out there that are developing AI companions. Like you think of the movie Her, where
Mm.
Joaquin Phoenix was like having a love affair with his computer. Like now you have like you can generate an avatar. Like I'm having a conversation with you right now and we're looking at each other on video, but like, Mark Zuckerberg says that like AI companions are going to be the cure for loneliness,
Yeah.
um, for the loneliness epidemic. So is it going to be as satisfying as a human to have like a relationship and to interact with an AI and to consume content generated by an AI, as it is to consume content and have a relationship with another human? Like that's something that is interesting and to think about.
I certainly think it will help. I think curing the loneliness epidemic is like, why say these dramatic things you can't prove? It will definitely help. Just talking to yourself sometimes helps. So if there's something that answers, even if you know that it's something you plugged in and turned on, it'll still help. You're still like at least processing your own thoughts with the help of this thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you have somebody to talk to, it helps, right? So,
Yeah. And with the artist thing, that I wanted to say, it actually kind of now reminds me of the debate over lip syncing many decades ago, where true artists were always saying that, listen, fucking up our songs and making mistakes, and sometimes the drums not sounding right live, that's part of the magic. That's why you come see music live. Otherwise, just stay home and listen to the record. Why are you here? You know?
it creates a different atmosphere, and that's why a lot of people go to shows, is because you like to see, these people live in the flesh. They're human, they make
Yeah.
mistakes. Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see what happens in this space. AI generated music. I mean, again, music is something different because like you listen to it, you don't see it unless there's a
Yeah.
video. But maybe it'll still evoke the same emotions and like get the same response from you as like an actual song generated by people. Um,
Yeah.
but I think like the technology already exists today to be able to make AI generated music, and I think we will start to see like AI artists emerge in the next few years.
Yeah, I had one more topic for you. We'll leave some for the future chats because I'm thinking we need like one of these per season at least. So we have like a living lecture series that that adapts to what's happening in the world. One more thing is privacy. I thought of it now with Apple, and now has this thing about healthcare where they want to get into healthcare, and part of that is because they have this massive amount of data from people wearing their watches for so many years and like giving them all their health data. So now they might have some kind of strength. Otherwise, Apple, I understand, is not doing very well in the AI field, but in this health thing, they might be able to come out with some cool products that other people can't. That massive amount of data they've collected now, isn't that exactly what they said they wouldn't do? Is if you wear this wrist that we won't collect your pulse every second, and actually that's exactly what they've done, right?
I don't know. I'd have to like a lot of times you do consent for them to monitor and record all of that. Like I'm wearing a Pixel watch and it is constantly like monitoring my biometrics, but I don't know what what Google's actually doing with the data. But I think like with privacy, so AI today is trained like on typically like these large models that you see are trained on the internet and anything that's not accessible behind a paywall. And so this is where companies are looking for ways that they have some type of strategic competitive advantage from a data perspective. It's like I can create an AI model using the proprietary data that I've generated or that my users have generated that other company doesn't have access to, right? And what a lot of people in the open source community would say is like we should open source all this data, but there's all types of consents required, especially when it comes to medical data. But I think that's what a lot of these companies are doing. They're looking at like how do I actually monetize the data that I have now in a world in the world of AI. And I talked about pervasive AI agents. Like as AI agents become more pervasive, they're going to have like this deep integration with your personal devices and accounts. So like your email, your banking apps, you're going to need to give them like root access to all of these things to be able to act on your behalf. And so now all of a sudden, the AI has access to all of this data. It's going to mean that to create a competitive advantage in these new worlds, like in this new world, these companies that develop different things or different products are going to want to like find some way to create a competitive advantage with their proprietary data, and they're going to want to harvest this sensitive data. Um, you know, and the question is like how explicitly you make your user aware of the consent, and like how granular is the consent. And most users, right, when I signed up for my Pixel Watch, I probably just hit accept as I went through the agreement. And then 10 years from now, I'm going to find out that like all of my medical data, all my biometric data is being used for some proprietary product. So I think it's yeah, I think a lot of us as consumers don't even read through these consent authorizations and we just click through them, right?
That's worrying. So they will know everything. The robot will know
Yeah.
when I'm gonna have a heart attack before I'll have it.
Yeah, and then so I think transparency is a big thing. Like, companies need to be transparent with how they're using data, and they need to make sure that the consumer or the business is aware of how their data will be used. Like in enterprises today, like I'm not in a B2C business, I'm B2B, and privacy and control of data is everything in the business I work in. But I think on the consumer side, we're a little bit more trusting,
Yeah.
and we rely on these companies that we have relationships with to keep our data safe.
What we actually rely on, we don't trust the companies and we never have, and we know they're doing whatever is makes most money. But what we trusted in would be that they would be forced by law to do the right thing. So they won't be transparent and do the right thing. But we have had this trust that our governments would have made regulations that
Yeah,
force them to be transparent and do the right thing. But
yeah,
government regulation is lagging massively behind. So now being a trusting of a company with any consent form is just all of us being massive idiots, right?
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think like on the regulatory side of things, it's really difficult. Like AI today is basically a black box for most people. I think even the companies that develop AI sometimes don't know how the AI system is getting to, how it's working through its decision making process. And I think like when you start incorporating data that's subject to like GDPR, it complicates things, and there's you don't often know. So I think there is going to have to be all types of new regulation with like pervasive AI agents. There's this possible bias that happens in autonomous decision making by AI systems. So, you could risk discrimination, all types of things, right? All types of bias. And I think auditing how these decisions are made is really difficult. So, governments are going to have this new challenge, this new regulatory challenge to face with this.
That's exactly, we've come full circle. That's exactly where we ended last time. So clearly one of the things that needs to happen clearly is more focus on doing the right type of regulation. But give us for the end, because you made such an amazing prediction by accident with DeepSeek last time. So what's gonna happen after this is released and until your next appearance? Something that everyone can gamble on.
Well, okay, I've said pervasive AI agents a lot in this
Mm.
episode, and I think like the rhetoric today has outpaced the technology and the adoption. But I think like in the next 6 months to a year, you will start seeing agents start to be present in your life, AI agents present in your life. I think that's like a realistic thing. Just an example, I listened to an interview from the CEO of Visa recently, and he said that they're creating like a payments agent that basically you will be able to go give authorization to this agent to go out onto the internet and make purchases on your behalf. And he said that would be available like within the next quarter or two. And this was last quarter. So I think, agents has been rhetoric primarily, but I think we will start to see them in our personal life and in our work lives relatively soon.
I look forward to seeing which dum-dums in my immediate circles start letting the robot make autonomous purchase decisions on the internet. It'll be hilarious. I look forward to it.
Yeah, but that's something that's coming. Um, and then we haven't, we should do an episode about like robotics at some point and like humanoid robots.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert in that field, but I think that's not short term. That won't be before the next episode, but I think in the next 3 to 5 years we will
Well,
see.
you're just an enthusiastic consumer of the sex robots, but that's a different thing, I guess.
Well, that will
Yeah.
that will be one thing that they can be used for, I'm sure.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
that will be the primary thing that that humanoid robots will be used for. And that's how
Yeah,
much I trust people. Yeah.
there will be a niche, maybe not even niche, a community of people that are using it for those purposes. No, I think you'll start to see that. But yeah, in the next few months, I think we will start to see AI agents becoming more pervasive. So people should plan for that and think about that. Businesses are thinking about it a lot now. So I think as
Hmm.
people will have to start thinking about how we incorporate AI agents into our daily life.
Yeah. Cool. Any other public service announcements?
Yeah,
No.
if your toaster starts giving you life advice, it's probably AI.
Okay, good. Hey, by the way, you're also a listener of the podcast. As a representative of the listener community, anything to say? What should I do more of? What should I do less of?
I think the stories and the people that you get on here are really interesting. Like I was thinking about it today. I was like, geez, you've had so many amazing stories told like in the last few weeks. The one I was listening to yesterday was the person that had just left the Mormon church.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I think the variety of kind of perspectives and stories that people come on here and tell is really, really intriguing. I like it. I usually listen in my car, but I don't think you're doing anything wrong. I think keep bringing in diverse perspectives, bring people in that challenge the way you think. And
Right.
I always like hearing from different people and different walks of life.
Yeah. And I'll say, dogs, be kind to your dog. And
Yeah,
this one we will dedicate to the memory of Tenley, right? An
yeah,
awesome dog that you lost, unfortunately.
yeah. It's been challenging, but
Yeah.
she she brought a lot of joy to our lives, and
Yeah.
we brought a lot of joy to hers. So thank you for dedicating to her. I'm sure
Yeah.
my wife will really like
Dogs are
that.
the best.
Yeah, I love
All right,
dogs.
buddy. We will see you for an update, and we hope all those things. We will all put our money on those things that they'll happen, and we'll see how well you did in the next one.
Let's try to do an AI generated Danny podcast and see
All
if
right,
your
for the
if your
next one.
listeners notice.
Okay, cool. We won't. Yeah, we won't give it away. All right, perfect. Let's try
Yeah,
that. That's a good idea. All right,
yeah.
buddy.
All right, see you,
Thanks for
buddy.
your time. We'll see you
All
next
right, take
time.
care.